The New York Giants 2024 regular season schedule is out, and I have some thoughts and takeaways over how it's constructed. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for the New York Giants team page over on the Fan Nation Network. Find our written work at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, to everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. You are appreciated. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the NFL schedule is finally here. It dropped officially at 8 o'clock. I actually had it a little earlier in the day, but it was embargoed, so I couldn't really leak too much out on it. But on today's show, we're going to take a look at some takeaways on the schedule. I'm going to give you some thoughts. I'm going to give you what I think are the most intriguing games on the New York Giants schedule. Then we're going to do some quick predictions. I have the Giants finishing 9-8 with this schedule. So we're going to give you some quick predictions there. And then in the final segment, this was kind of a surprise. So I figured I would incorporate it into this show. And that is the Giants were announced as being a Hard Knocks participant. But no, not that Hard Knocks, not the Hard Knocks that's going to track their comings and goings and doings in training camp, but rather their off season that they just completed. So I'm going to talk about what I think some of the key storylines we will see, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that later on. That was a surprise. I didn't see that coming. I know about some of the things they're doing for the 100th anniversary, which are embargoed, but that one I did not see coming. So we'll talk about that later. All right, let's talk schedule first, because that was the big one. That's what everybody was kind of waiting for. All right, the Giants opened the year at home against the Minnesota Vikings. And I got to admit, while I was hoping it would be against the Colts because of the historic value, they ended up moving the game against the Colts to week 17. And that game is either going to be played on December 28th or December 29th. And I'll talk about that in just a bit. But I want to get back to the Vikings game, because there's two things why I find this game in particular to be really intriguing. Number one, there is a possibility that the Vikings will start quarterback J.J. McCarthy, who, as we probably know by now, the Giants had a chance to draft him after Drake May went to the New England Patriots in the third spot in the first round. There was talk that the Giants were interested in J.J. McCarthy. They just didn't see him as the best value at number 6. So J.J. McCarthy went to the Vikings, and the quarterback competition out in Minnesota is going to be obviously between McCarthy and Sam Darnold. It is expected that McCarthy will maybe win that competition. So that will give us an opportunity to see what the Giants passed up. Did they make the right decision in passing up on J.J. McCarthy, or did they make a decision that they're going to regret down the line? So that's certainly one of the key storylines. And that also makes that week 1 game, in my mind at any rate, one of the most intriguing games on the Giants schedule. All right, keeping along with some thoughts. Weeks 3 through 8, you talk about a murderer's row. So the Giants in week 3 have, they have, they're at Cleveland. Then they come home week 4 for a Thursday night game against Dallas. Then they're at Seattle in week 5, home on Monday night against the Cincinnati Bengals. Then they host the Philadelphia Eagles in the Saquon Barkley revenge game, also one of the intriguing games on the calendar for obvious reasons. And then in week 8, they are at Pittsburgh for Monday night. Now, while the games are spread out nicely as far as turnaround time for the most part, that is a really, really tough stretch right there. And I got to be honest with you, folks. I have the Giants winning maybe 2 games in that stretch. So that one's going to be a little tricky. And we'll talk about, the individual one-loss record in segment 3. But that stretch right there, when I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, that is a rough stretch. Now, the Giants also, they have, let's see, in week 10, Carolina. They go to Munich, Germany for that. Who didn't see that game coming? I mean, look, I hinted at that um, both on Giants, on the Giants team page on SI.com. I talked about that, I think, in my schedule predictions. That was obvious, that one. And, the Giants, as you guys know, were awarded the German market rights this past offseason. So with Carolina already on tap to go play in Germany, it just made too much sense for the Giants to not play that game or not be assigned that game. So they're going to get that game in week 10, and then week 11 is the bye. And oh, by the way, on November 28th, which is Thanksgiving, the Giants are playing the Dallas Cowboys in Arlington. Right. So actually, this is the first time I think in the Giants' history, this may very well be the first time that the Giants have not only 2 games on Thursday, but the 2 games are against the same team because they are facing the Cowboys week 4 on Thursday night. So these are 2 nationally televised games. Look, death, taxes, and the Dallas Cowboys on national TV. That's just how it is for the New York Giants. So that game obviously is going to draw a lot of interest, and I have the Cowboys game actually as an interesting game because we talk about the Giants closing the talent gap between the Eagles and the Cowboys. I'd like to think that this year the Giants are a lot closer to having closed the gap against the Cowboys than they are against the Eagles. Now, of course, time will tell. I thought last year that they had done a decent enough job in closing the gap, but then the Cowboys came out and absolutely pasted the Giants in week 1. So there's going to be an element of revenge in that first meeting, which comes in week 4, the Thursday night game. But yeah, we'll see how the Giants have kind of, closed the gap at all. All right. I think for weeks 13 through 18, I think the Giants are set up for a strong finish. Now, in week 13, they are, I mentioned they're at Dallas. Then they come home and they host New Orleans in week 14, Baltimore in week 15. Then they're at Atlanta week 16. Week 17, they're home against Indianapolis. And then they finish the season at Philadelphia. 3rd year in a row, by the way, they're finishing up against Philadelphia. Death, taxes, and finishing up against Philadelphia. But anyway, I talked about actually, before I get to that point, I could see the Giants in that stretch going, let's see, I had them going 4-3 in that stretch, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, 4-3. So could be a strong finish. But again, we'll talk about the individual games and why I think they're going to win or lose in the next segment. The other thing I want to make note of, the Giants nod to history. The week 17 game against the Indianapolis Colts is either going to be played on December 28th or the 29th. Why is that significant? Because if they somehow schedule the game for December 28th, which I am hoping they do, that will mark the anniversary, the exact day of the 1958 championship game between the New York Giants and the then Baltimore Colts. That game, commonly known in football history as the greatest game ever played. Why was it so great? For those of you who don't know, number one, it was the first game whose outcome was decided in overtime. It was a game that just had everything in it. I mean, it was just a fascinating game. I wrote about it for my book in the Big 50. That was also a game in which really put the NFL on the map. I remember reading it was televised by NBC, and it really put the NFL, which is, at that point was a few years old. I think the NFL started in the 1920s, and so it wasn't, it was old, but not that old. But that's when the NFL really took off in popularity because that game just had so much involved in it. And years later, there was a poll among sports writers to affirm that that indeed was the greatest game ever played, and sure enough, it had that element. And oh, by the way, the Giants lost that game in overtime, but still, it was quite the game. I think that game, Raymond Berry, who was a receiver with the Colts, set a reception record. I think he had 12 receptions in that game, and it was later broken in modern era. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Demaryius Thomas of the Denver Broncos, but there were all kinds of good things to come out of that game. So, again, just to kind of get back to that, that week 17 game against the Colts has some historic value, and the Giants' 100th anniversary. So that's that take. And let me see. Other interesting games that I have on my count that I've circled: the Week 6 game against the Cincinnati Bengals. I find that one interesting because, look, the Bengals in 2 of the last 3 years have gone deep into the playoffs, even getting to the Super Bowl one year. That's going to be a really good measuring stick for the Giants. It's a Monday night game, but you want to go up against the very best wherever you can. And I think that's going to be a really good measuring stick for the New York Giants. Let me see, what other games do I have in there? Obviously, I had the Week 7 game against the Eagles, the Saquon Barkley revenge game, or the homecoming game, if you will. And I think those were the only ones those were the only ones that I had on my calendar as being really interesting. So, all right, coming up next, I'm going to go down each game, give you a quick prediction and why. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans. So when I'm not following the New York Giants, there's no greater thrill for me than playoff hockey. And with the New York Rangers in the thick of the Stanley Cup Finals hunt, how cool would it be to get to a game to cheer on the blue shirts? What's that, you say? They're sold out? Well, with Game Time, there are always great seats available at competitive prices. Game Time offers last-minute deals that can save you even more, and they take the guesswork out of what your seat view looks like, the fees, and all that other stuff that can make ticket buying a nightmare elsewhere. With Game Time, you even get event cancellation protection, and if you find your tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, we're going to do each game. We're going to go down the list, and I'm going to give you a estimate, what I think is going to happen, a prediction, win or lose. Now, normally I don't like to do this far in advance because the 53-man rosters are not set. Injuries can come into the factor. So many things can go wrong. But it's a fun exercise. It's something everybody does. So why not? And you know me, guys. I try to be optimistic. I also try to be realistic. And I think in the first segment, I said I had them at 9-8. I actually have a different record. So we're going to go through it. And you can tell me if you agree or disagree. So let's get started. First thing I want to say, the Giants have got to come out of the gate 2-0. Have got to come out of the gate 2-0. And I do have them, by the way, for 2-0. I have them starting with a win against Minnesota and a win against Washington. Now, if the Giants come out 1-1, or worse yet, 0-2, we're in trouble. It's that simple, because you remember I mentioned that murderer's row between weeks 3 and week 8. They're in trouble if they come out 1-1 or 0-2 in those first 2 games. All right, so going on, I have a win against Minnesota, a win against Washington. Week 3 at Cleveland, I have a loss there. Week 4, Thursday night against Dallas, I have another loss. The Giants just don't do well on prime time. I don't know why. I don't think it changes, to be honest with you. To come off of a road game and then you have to get right back to work, that's going to be tricky. So I just don't feel that the Giants are going to be able to split those two games. All right. Then they turn around and they go out to the West Coast. They'll have 10 days, a 10-day break. They face the Seattle Seahawks. I have that as a win. Then they come home and they have, let me see, a Monday night, I think it is. They have the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm giving that one a loss. All right, even though there's some extra time there. Philadelphia, the Saquon homecoming. I'm giving that one a loss. The Eagles still have a very loaded roster. I don't know that the Giants have necessarily closed the gap with Philadelphia. Pittsburgh, at Pittsburgh on Monday night. Again, the Giants, for whatever the reason, and I know they won last year against the Packers on Monday night, but they're not regularly good performers under the lights, so I have them losing that game. No, I'm sorry, I have them winning that game, actually. Winning. Why do I have them winning? Because Pittsburgh has Russell Wilson as quarterback, and I think they can beat Russell Wilson. I know some of you think I'm crazy for saying that, but yeah, I think they can beat him. But still, it's going to be one of those games because, again, the Giants just don't do well in prime time for whatever the reason. Then week 9, Washington Commanders at home. That should be a win. Look, the Giants have had the Commanders number for God knows how many years now. And even though this is a new era down in Washington, I think the Giants can still get the better of their division rivals. Week 10 at Carolina in Munich, Germany. That should be a win. I don't see why it wouldn't. Week 11's the bye. Week 12, they are home against Tampa Bay. I think they beat Tampa Bay. Week 13, the Thanksgiving game against Dallas. I think that's a loss. Week 14, they come home to face the New Orleans Saints. That will be a win. Week 15, they face the Baltimore Ravens and reigning league MVP Lamar Jackson. I have that as a loss. Week 16 at Atlanta, that should be a win. I mean, Atlanta, I still don't know exactly what they're doing at quarterback. I'm assuming it's going to be Kirk Cousins, but who knows? They've added, Michael Penix Jr., and I don't think they even know what they're going to do at quarterback right now, to be honest with you. Week 17 against the Colts, I think that will be a win. Week 18 at Philadelphia, not feeling that one, folks. I think that's a loss. So that being said, I think having divided up the schedule into segments, the first 2 games, I think they can go 2-0. That stretch that I talked about, I have them going, let's see, that's from weeks 3 to week 8. So I have them winning 2 games and losing 4 in that stretch. I have them winning 2, their next 3 games, which are sandwiched around the bye. And then from week 13 onward, that's going to be the stretch that obviously determines who's in the playoffs and who's not. I have them going 1, 2, 3. I have them going 3-3 that last stretch. So altogether, what do I have them at? I think it's 10-7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, 10-7. Too optimistic? Maybe. I know a lot of you out there are like, well, what about the quarterback situation? What about this, that, the other thing? This is just preliminary, guys. And oh, by the way, this is why I don't really like to do these predictions because so much can change. And obviously, once we get into the to the weekly coverage of each game, my opinions probably will change based on injury status, based on personnel, based on other factors. But just a quick glance, this is what I can potentially see. Maybe 9-8 is more realistic, but I think 10-7, based on a quick glance, is possible. But we'll see, obviously. One other thing, real quick, before I get to the next segment, the preseason opponents are also set. We don't have the days or the times just yet. Once we get them, obviously, we'll be able to tell when training camp starts. But for your records, the Giants will host the Detroit Lions week 1 of the preseason. They'll be at Houston week 2, and then they will be, quote unquote, at the Jets week 3. Week 1, expect there to be joint practices with the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell talked about that at the league meetings back in March. Mentioned that to their beat writers. So there probably will be joint practices at East Rutherford. Hopefully, those will be open to the public. And I think there's going to be at least one joint practice with the Jets, probably at Florham Park. I would think, because usually the home team is the host. So since the Jets would be the host or the home team in the preseason, I would think that if they're going to have a joint practice, it's going to be at Florham Park, which is where the Jets train. But I don't know that for sure. I know that was the plan last year, and they had to scrap the plans. So we'll see if they go back to that. All right, coming up next, the Giants are going to be on Hard Knocks. I'm going to tell you more about that, and I'm going to tell you about the storylines that I know I'll be keeping an eye on, or I hope to see more of. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. If you're like me and you're liking the New York Knicks odds or the New York Rangers odds as they pursue championship immortality in their respective sports, you'll want to be part of the action. And right now, when you sign up for an account on FanDuel, you will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're just rolling right along here. Coming up after the scheduling settles down, the Giants are finishing up phase 2 of their off-season program, and in another week or so, we will have the OTAs. So we'll have some more football to talk about before we head into the summer month of June, the start of summer, and the downtime for the NFL. So still plenty to talk about here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And speaking of which, I mentioned this was a surprise. I didn't see this coming. I hadn't heard this was coming. So kudos to the Giants, because usually I catch wind of stuff that they're planning to do and roll out, stuff that obviously has to be kept embargoed. But the Giants are going to appear this year on Hard Knocks. Now, no, it's not going to be the in-season version. No, it's not going to be the training camp version. Instead, it is a new iteration of Hard Knocks in which it covers the off season. So from what I understand, it's going to cover from the end of the 2023 season right through to the mini camps. All right. So we're talking that period from January, about mid-January through probably, let's see, the next mini camp is June, probably through June. All right. So the mini camps. It's a 5-episode installment. It will air on HBO, also be streamed on Max. It starts July 2nd, which is a Tuesday, and a new episode will drop every Tuesday. So you'll be able to catch that if you have HBO. All right, so what are the top storylines? Well, if you've been following along, you probably are not going to disagree with all these, but I know I would like to see them start off with the coaching staff shakeup. The decision, obviously, to replace Bobby Johnson, Thomas McGahee, the Wink Martindale resignation, the decision to bring in the new guys. Now, knowing the Giants, I don't think they're going to show that footage. I really doubt it. You'd like to get maybe some context involved there, maybe a mention or two, but I question if they will go down that road. I think if anything, maybe you might see something about, the hiring of the new coaches that they brought in, but still, I'd like to see them, what went into that, the interviews of some of these new coaches that they brought in, particularly new defensive coordinator Shane Bowen, and just, how that all came together. Um, Another storyline that I'm hoping to see is the internal discussions they had about Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney. They're two top free agents, both of whom left the team. Maybe show a clip of them talking to the agents. I don't know if they will or won't, or maybe they have internal discussions and whatnot. So I'd like to see, maybe get a little insight into that, if at all possible. Again, I don't know, I don't anticipate the Giants are going to, put anything out there that might paint somebody else in a bad light, but I'm just telling you what I'd like to see in terms of, must see TV. Obviously, we're going to want to see what went into the Brian Burns trade. I think that will be shown. I think we will see the Giants at, the combine and some pro days and stuff like that. That'll certainly be there. We might see some, draft meetings, maybe the draft war rooms site. That would be kind of neat. What went into, crafting their draft board. I don't think we'll see their draft board, but, what went into, kind of putting it together. Maybe some footage from the war room during the draft weekend. Maybe we'll see the phone call. If Joe Shane called the Patriots, hey, we want to trade up, or, or other discussions that they might have had with other teams. There was a report, and I had heard this as well, that the Giants had an offer, I think it was from the Colts, if I'm not mistaken, to trade down, and they decided not to do it. So maybe we'll see that. And then obviously, just how the draft kind of panned out, and the behind the scenes stuff with the mini camps, maybe see a little bit of locker room activity. The mini camp stuff, we were there obviously for the rookie mini camp, but we're not there for phase 1, phase 2 of the offseason program. So maybe we see a little bit of that. What I'm told about the 5-part series is there will be enough there for even, the media who were around the team, quite a bit during the off season. There will be enough there for us to learn something that maybe we didn't know before. So I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it was something that I know a lot of people were surprised that John Mara, agreed to allow, but this is the 100th anniversary of the team. And it's really, to allow access during the off season is kind of harmless if you think about it. It's just a matter of how detailed and how in depth the Giants actually allowed the HBO cameras to get. And like I said, I don't think you're going to see, Brian Dable and Wink Martindale going at each other, screaming at each other. I don't think you're going to see or hear anybody disparage another party, but you might get some insight that maybe you didn't know. So I'm looking forward to it. I know I will get HBO. I don't currently have it, but I will get it for this particular series, and I'll be reviewing the series as well. So that's something to look forward to when we get to training camp. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Oh, by the way, let me know what you think about the Giants 2024 schedule. Drop a comment in the comment box below if you're watching on YouTube, or send me an email. Let me know if you're listening on our audio platforms. My contact information is in the show notes, so I hope to hear from you. All right, Giant fans, I will see you again tomorrow with an all-new episode of the Locked On Giants podcast.